Deconverted Man here. 2 days ago, JasperDale left a comment on my video, The No Evidence for God If God is Supernatural. Now, normally I would respond to these sort of comments with text, but YouTube decided to hide this one as spam from me, so I didn't see it until I checked my community settings and all that stuff that you have to check to make sure that you don't have spam or messages that are sent to you. Thanks, YouTube, for making that hard on creators. Oh well. They're too busy taking away people's ads to really worry about YouTube not sucking for the rest of us, I guess. What was I complaining about? Oh, right. JasperDale made this comment. So I wanted to read it and then respond to the train wreck of the comment. But first, a quick recap of the video that he's responding to. In that video, I made a very simple syllogism. There cannot be evidence for the supernatural. If God's supernatural, then there's no evidence of God, and I backed this up with various definitions of the word supernatural. In order to refute this syllogism, you have to show that there's one or more logical fallacies or argue against the conclusion. Will JasperDale do any of this? Well, we're about to see as I read to you the comment that they made. Here we go. JasperDale. Oh, to make this real simple. 20 people see a man leave your mom's house holding a bloody knife and observe him flee into the woods. When the man is caught, he is put in a line of suspects, and all 20 people identify him as the man they saw leave your mom's house. Can this information that he was identified by 20 different people as a person leaving your mom's house be used as evidence at his trial? Well, Jasper, that's an interesting question, but it has no bearing on the video itself because 20 people are not supernatural. My mom is not supernatural. My mom's house is not supernatural. The bloody knife is not supernatural. The woods are not supernatural. The man is not supernatural. The line of suspects is not supernatural. And the 20 people identifying him as the man they saw are also not supernatural. So at no point does this address the video and its argument at all. So, way to go off on a giant red herring and an appeal to an analogy that doesn't work. The answer would be probably yes, that witnesses are usually taken in for police investigations. And sometimes in a trial that is used as evidence. Sometimes it is not evidence. Depends on the trial. But we're not in a courtroom setting. This is logic. So, it doesn't work the same way. Also, we have to admit that eyewitness testimony is the worst kind of testimony that we can have. Now, whether or not that means we still use it in a trial is irrelevant to the fact that it's the worst sort of testimony that you can have. And in fact, we might not even need testimony because we have the bloody knife. So we have potential for DNA left on that knife as well as in the house. So that would trump any and all testimony from any amount of people. Let's say that it had his DNA on the knife and there was DNA of him in the house. It wouldn't matter how many people said that they didn't see him at the house or saw him somewhere else. The DNA puts him there. And that's the end of that. So, testable evidence, better than just, oh yeah, I saw the guy there. But it depends on how soon they saw him and what the light was and other factors. But again, this is not a trial. This is just how logic functions, and you didn't address it at all. Well, let's see your next paragraph. Maybe you did better there. According to Dan, the answer would be no. This is not evidence. You can never use the scientific method to test the claim that all 20 people saw the man leave your mom's house. You cannot repeat the event. If you can't repeat an event, and get the same result, proving a hypothesis, then it fails the scientific method test. At what point in the video did I say that the only way to know anything is with the scientific method? It's the best way that we have, first of all, but even if we're to use your poor analogy that doesn't connect to this in any way, shape, or form, we have to assume that DNA evidence isn't a thing, I guess, and assume that the only evidence that we have is non-evidence, which would be the testimonial of these people. That's not evidence. We can't test whether or not they saw anything. We could hypothetically test and see if they believe that they saw something, but we couldn't test and see whether or not that thing actually occurred. There's not a way to do that. So if we only have these people to go on, and our court system was very different than it is now, and we just said, let's only use the scientific method in the court of law from this point forward, and all you had was eyewitness testimony, then it wouldn't go to court. It would get thrown out because he didn't have any evidence. But you could still make some sort of study based on what they claim to saw and see whether or not it compares with each other, whether or not the times sync up. There's still some testing that you could perform on those people that does fall within the realm of the scientific method. It's just not the weak version of the scientific method that you provided here, because that's really not what the scientific method is. I mean, there's more to it than what you said here. But even if it was the case that our court system was vastly different, and for whatever reason I said, look, we just have to go with the scientific method always for everything, period, except for the sentence that I just said, then I guess I would say, yeah, if you had nothing but eyewitness testimony, you'd be thrown out of court, and that'd be the end of that. But that's not the sort of court system we have. It's not the sort of court system I'm arguing for. And at no point in the video did I say that that's the only way we can find out something about something. But again, the people that are witnessing the event that you made up are mortal, normal, naturalistic people. And the thing that they witnessed is a normal, natural, mundane event. So the analogy still fails, even if I was going to say the thing that you want me to say, which I didn't say, and I would thank you to not put words into my mouth or to try to mind read what I would say. How many of you would tell the prosecutor that he should ignore what these people said in regards to your mom's murder? Hold on. Jasper, you didn't present a murder scenario. You presented, if I am correct, let me go back to make sure that I am. Yeah, I was right. You didn't present this as a murder. You just said that 20 people saw somebody leaving the house with a bloody knife. It could be anything. I don't know. Could have been any sort of accident. Could have been just, his own blood. Could have been the cat's blood, for all we know. But now you're making it a murder. And so now you're retro-ing your own bad analogy. Wow. What was your question anyways? I see. You equivocated the word evidence. See, the thing is, in a court of law, evidence means something different than it does in logic and in the way that I was using the word evidence in the video. But again, there's no trial being held here for a supernatural thing that occurred. So your analogy still doesn't work. I'm going to be saying that a lot in this video. Finally, what would your opinion of a prosecutor who refused to consider the fact that all 20 people figured the same guy and blah, 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 blah. It's irrelevant, okay? The rest of everything you've said is completely irrelevant because at no point in your scenario did anything supernatural happen. So until you present a supernatural event to examine, there's nothing to really talk about here. And my opinion of a prosecutor would not be relevant, the best you could do would be to fire that person and hire someone else, call for a mistrial or something like that. But the court system works differently than logic does. Okay, I'm going to skip past some more things that they said because they're completely irrelevant and I don't care about them and they're more false analogy, and get to the next bit that actually is interesting to talk about. So let me read this. Of course the supernatural can be proved by evidence. Just like a man can be placed at the scene of a crime if 20 different people all saw him there and to testify to it. Just because what a person saw happen to be supernatural, it doesn't mean that it automatically is faith, not evidence. We have eyewitness testimony of people who saw the risen Jesus of Nazareth risen after being dead for only 3 days. Well, actually, you don't have the testimony of those people at all. Period. And if you knew biblical history, you wouldn't have said what you just said. So I can only guess that you have zero idea about biblical history. So let me enlighten you on that. The writings that we have, the oldest writings, are, 50, 40 years after these events happened? Not written by the witnesses, if there were any witnesses. Written by, we don't even know. And these are copies of copies. We know that much. So what we have is a story about people who supposedly saw something. We don't have those people. Those people are not interviewed. Those people are not requested their names, their addresses. There's no investigative reporting going on. It's, there was 20 people that saw Jesus come back from the dead. There was 100 people. There was 1,000,000 people. Whatever. It doesn't matter because it's a story. That's what you have. You have a story about a number of people supposedly seeing an event. That's one problem. Then if we assume, for some reason, that any number of people supposedly saw an event, we have to wonder whether they saw what they really saw, or if they just believed what they saw, or if they came to believe it later. If you go to India, you can go and you can watch a guru, and they will levitate off the ground. It's not very impressive, but they'll do it. And you might actually see them levitate off the ground depending on what guru you go to. Now, of course, they won't let you examine them to see how they did it, if they actually levitate off the ground. But everybody around you will say, yeah, that totally happened. They totally defied gravity. It was magical. Even if the guru does not budge from the ground, they'll still claim to have seen it. They will insist that they saw him levitate off the ground. Now, if you do see them levitate off the ground, is that supernatural or is it just a trick? Well, it's probably a trick, because we know that people can do tricks where it looks like they're levitating off the ground. We don't know of anyone that can actually do this on their own. There's been no case where a guru has said, you know what, guys, I'm going to go to this laboratory here, and I'm going to prove in controlled conditions that I can levitate in the air. Nothing around me, nothing in the room. They make sure there's no wires or strings or poles, all stripped naked. They can film it with infrared, yada, yada, yada. And bam, if he can levitate, man, that changes the world. But we've never had that. We've also never had anybody come back from being dead a while, like a long time. Like people have come back, quote unquote, from different various degrees of death after a few days or a few hours. Like I think the longest was an actual 24 hours. But they were dead at different levels, because like what we consider to be death is kind of ill-defined, and depending on when they died in history, the medical people examining them might have done a bad job. So we have the problem of, what if these people just saw what they wanted to see? What if they didn't see Jesus come back? They saw somebody from a distance that looked like him, or they heard about Jesus coming back and they just believed it, and then when they told their friends and family, it changed the story from I heard about him to I saw him. And it's really easy to change that sort of story. How many people can say that they saw Joseph Smith's golden plates? One, Joseph Smith. But you will get the testimony of Oliver Cowdery and the early church members to say that it's all legitimate anyways. So people can be fooled into thinking things happened that nobody can verify, or only one person could have verified. That doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it real. It doesn't make it that it actually happened. We don't have an example that somebody can do that. So let's just say that we did. If we had an example that somebody came back from the dead, then that wouldn't be a supernatural event. It would be a normal, ordinary, mundane event. It'd be like, yeah, that's happened. And that, I mean, maybe it happens like a couple times every 5 years or something. But we would have an example of it happening. Whereas if somebody appears to come back from the dead after, let's say, 2.5 days, because you can't actually say it was 3 days, because, again, if you read the Gospels, you read all 4 of them side by side, it's either 2.5 nights, or it's like a half a day, or it's like a quarter and 3 days, or like it changes depending on which Gospel you read, so it's kind of unclear how long Jesus was supposedly dead. Almost as if the writers didn't know what the full story was and were just making it up or something, But you don't have people that witnessed it. You have people that claim they witnessed it. And then you have the secondary problem of, how do we so we don't know. We don't know that it happened. We have no example. But if we did have an example, then it wouldn't be a supernatural event. But here's the other big problem, okay? If somebody dies and a couple days later they come back to life and the doctors were all wrong, the person happens to still be alive and they're banging on their casket or wherever the bleep they happen to be, that's kind of scary and make a good horror movie. But they have this long string hanging over the morgue beds. In case somebody is alive, they can actually pull the string and alert the medical people that they're not dead. Yeah, pretty creepy, huh? But let's just say that happens and they confirm that the person was like brain dead, and they came back. Is that supernatural, or is it just their own body? And you say, well, you're going into the swoon theory where, Jesus wasn't killed quite really dead. So, no, we're talking major damage to his body, right? Nobody could recover from that. Really? You know that for sure? Like there's no condition that somebody could be hypothetically put into where they would suffer that sort of trauma and yet still somehow survive? I'm just asking. Why couldn't it happen naturally? Unless we have absolute proof that it could never happen naturally, then how could we say this event that I'm now seeing, that's a supernatural event? In fact, we would have to wipe away all possibility that it was a natural phenomenon. And even then, we couldn't say it was a supernatural event because maybe we missed something. So the question is whether or not we actually saw something natural. What makes it supernatural in the first place? Is it something that we've never seen before and that we'll never see again? Well, other people came back from the dead in the Bible. Lazarus came back from the dead. You had all the zombies getting out of their graves and walking around in one of the Gospels. So there's a whole bunch of people coming back from the dead. So this is pretty much a normal occurrence as far as I can tell. It's not that extraordinary. But, it doesn't happen that often, and it doesn't happen in a way that we can test it. So, if you can get Jesus to come down here, get in one of our labs, let us kill him, and come back in a couple days, and we'll be able to test his body all along the way to see what the bleep's going on and find that there's no explanation at all for it, then maybe we could say it's supernatural. But the problem there is the best we would be able to say is we don't know how it happened. We just know that it happened. So, yeah, that's kind of the problem here. So, let me summarize this, okay? You've got a story about something that might have happened, told by people that have every reason to believe that this story happened, told by other people to other people, and then copied by other people about the story that supposedly happened. You don't have any evidence that those people existed. You don't have any evidence that they witnessed anything. You don't have evidence that the event occurred. And you cannot give an example of a supernatural event in today's day and age because you couldn't point to an event and call it supernatural. That's the point. You can't even identify the supernatural, or it becomes natural. There's no evidence and can be no evidence for the supernatural. If Jesus came back from the dead supernaturally, we would never be able to prove it, even if he was here in a laboratory setting. The best we could say is we didn't know how he came back from the dead. Leaving that squarely in the question mark category, not the supernatural category. But at least we'd have something to test. We don't have anything to test at all. So there's no evidence. A story is not evidence. Otherwise, all the other stories of all the other deities and gods out there would have to be taken into consideration, and they tend to have more people. In fact, going back to the Hindus, there's about 1 million of them alive right now that will tell you that different gurus can do the supernatural, even though we could go there and show that nothing they do is supernatural. That is, if they let us test them, which they wouldn't let us test them because, that would mean the gig's up. Still don't have a logical argument from you refuting my argument. The bottom line is, if it's supernatural, all you have is faith for it. You have the hope that the person returning back from the dead did that supernaturally. And the Bible's cool with that. The Bible's down with that. The Bible encourages faith. So why are you lying to yourself and denying what the Bible says by insisting that there's evidence when there can't be any? That's my question to you.